On a quiet Mother's Day morning, a Florida neighborhood woke to a nightmare. A bright 13-year-old girl vanished without a trace. And within hours, detectives would uncover something so brutal, so incomprehensible, it would haunt an entire community. This isn't just the story of a murder. It's the story of a teenager who walked into the darkness with someone she thought she knew and never came back. Before we step deeper into this haunting case, take a breath, and if you want more stories that peel back the shadows hiding in everyday places, you can stay with us by subscribing. Because once you hear what happened next, you'll understand why this case rattled even the most seasoned investigators. Mother's Day should have begun with warmth. Breakfast tables, soft footsteps in hallways, families gathering slowly into the morning. But inside the Bailey home, there was only the growing panic of a mother calling out her daughter's name, waiting for an answer that never came. At first, they tried to believe she'd slipped out early, maybe meeting a friend or going for a walk. But the seconds stretched, then minutes, and something in that silence felt terribly wrong. Neighbors stepped outside as the search began. People who normally waved from driveways now walked shoulder to shoulder, combing the winding streets and wooded edges of the neighborhood. Officers moved quickly, their radios crackling through the humid Florida air. Hope clung to everyone's voice, but beneath it was a fear no one dared say aloud. Hours later, in a patch of woods not far from where volunteers had passed moments earlier, the unimaginable was found. Tristyn's body lay hidden in the brush, her final moments marked by a level of violence no one could accept. The medical examiner would later confirm the horrifying truth. She had been stabbed 114 times, a number so extreme it didn't feel real, as if it belonged to a nightmare rather than a suburban community where kids biked home before dusk. Detectives immediately began pulling threads, rewinding the morning through surveillance footage and witness statements. And it didn't take long before a single grainy video began to reshape the entire investigation. Two teenagers walking together through the early morning calm. And later, one of them returning alone, running, shoes in hand, as if trying to outrun what he had just done. In that moment, the case shifted. Tristyn wasn't just missing anymore. Something far darker had taken place. And the truth was closing in fast, but detectives moved quickly, knowing every second could matter. They went to Aiden Fucci's house, the home of the boy seen walking with Tristyn in the surveillance footage. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, thick with an almost tangible unease. Everything looked ordinary at first. Bedrooms, furniture, the remnants of a typical teenager's life. But the investigators didn't need much time to spot the impossible. Clothing tossed aside, soaked with blood, evidence that no one could explain away. It was stark, undeniable, and horrifying. Aiden sat nearby, his expression disturbingly calm. He wasn't crying. He wasn't panicked. In fact, at times he seemed detached, like he was watching someone else's life unfold. When detectives questioned him, the inconsistencies began to emerge immediately. Where had he gone with Tristyn that morning? What had happened? His answers were vague, shifting, often contradictory. Then, in a moment that would later send chills through everyone who heard about it, he asked a question that revealed a shocking lack of awareness or remorse. Is she really dead? The truth, however, was already taking shape. A knife had been found submerged in a nearby pond. Its tip was broken off. That missing fragment would later be discovered lodged in Tristyn's skull during the autopsy. A grim and chilling connection that left no room for doubt. The brutality was shocking, but what unnerved investigators most was the precision. The act wasn't random, it wasn't impulsive. It had been deliberate. Interviews with friends painted an even darker picture. Some recalled Aiden speaking of wanting to kill someone, of imagining what it might feel like. At the time, they assumed it was a joke, a way to shock others, a typical teenager's dark fantasy. But the reality, as the evidence made devastatingly clear, was that he had acted on it. The motive or lack of one was chilling. There was no argument, no revenge, no fear driving him. Just a calculated curiosity, a desire to know the sensation of taking a life. As the investigation unfolded, the neighborhood that had once felt safe grew quiet and uneasy. People locked doors a little earlier, watched shadows a little longer. The fear wasn't just about what had happened. It was the understanding that the darkness had come from someone they thought they knew, someone who walked among them, blending in until it was too late. And for investigators, each discovery, each piece of evidence, confirmed one horrifying truth. This was not a random act of violence. It was something far more sinister, and it was only just beginning to reveal itself. By the time Aiden Fucci was formally taken into custody, the case had already captured national attention, but nothing could prepare the community for the details that would emerge next. On the ride to the sheriff's office, he recorded a video of himself, asking if anyone had found her. His tone flat, almost casual. There was no panic, no visible remorse, only a detached curiosity, as if he were trying to comprehend the consequences of an act he had already committed. That video, once released, became a haunting reminder of how chillingly ordinary evil can appear in a young face. Inside the interrogation room, his stories twisted and turned, each one colliding with the evidence piling up around him. First, he claimed he had left Tristyn alone and that someone else had attacked her. Then, he suggested she was unharmed when he walked away. Each version fell apart under the scrutiny of the investigators, leaving no room for doubt. The cameras, the footprints, the knife, everything pointed in one direction, and it was terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a mistake, a sudden altercation, or a moment of lost control. It was deliberate, planned, executed with the curiosity of someone who wanted to know what it felt like to take a life. The investigation soon revealed another shocking layer. His own mother, Crystal Smith, had tried to destroy evidence. Surveillance footage showed her scrubbing blood from his jeans in their bathroom, moving quickly, almost mechanically, unaware that cameras were capturing every motion. Her actions, whether driven by panic, denial, or an instinct to protect her child, would later land her in court for tampering with evidence. One family's tragedy was fracturing further, showing just how far the consequences of one act could reach. As the facts emerged, disbelief spread throughout the community. How could a teenager commit such a horrific act? How could a family, once ordinary and familiar, become entwined in a crime so monstrous? Vigils appeared almost immediately. Neighbors lit candles, left handwritten notes, ribbons, and photographs. Small gestures that tried to hold on to the memory of the girl whose life had been stolen so violently. Meanwhile, investigators and prosecutors worked tirelessly to reconstruct the timeline, messages, and behavior of Aiden leading up to that day. It became clear. There was no logical motive, no fight, no revenge, no personal vendetta. Just a chilling curiosity, a desire to experience something forbidden and horrifying. And that realization made the crime almost impossible to comprehend, leaving everyone grappling with a question that would haunt them long after the case moved to court. How could someone so young commit an act so unimaginable? When the court proceedings began, the air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the young boy who now faced the gravest charges imaginable. 16-year-old Aiden Fucci walked in, shackled and expressionless, his presence alone making the reality of the situation almost surreal. He wasn't just a teenager anymore. He was a defendant in one of the most horrifying crimes the state had seen in years, accused of brutally taking the life of a girl barely 13. Prosecutors presented the evidence with meticulous care. Each piece told a story more chilling than the last. The surveillance footage showing him and Tristyn walking together that morning, then him returning alone. The knife with its missing tip, later discovered embedded in Tristyn's skull, and the forensic details from the bloodied clothing found in his home. Step by step, they painted a picture of deliberate, calculated violence, not the impulsive act of a moment gone wrong. Every fact confirmed the unspeakable. This was a crime born from curiosity and darkness, not anger or revenge. Tristyn's family sat in the front row, their grief palpable. Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched a small photograph of her daughter. Siblings held each other tightly, their eyes wide, trying to make sense of a world that had been ripped apart in an instant. Each piece of evidence presented, every witness called, felt like a reopening of a wound that would never truly heal. The courtroom became a stage for the impossible, a place where the unthinkable was dissected and examined with clinical precision. Adding another layer to the tragedy was the involvement of Aiden's mother, Crystal Smith. Prosecutors presented footage of her frantically attempting to wash the blood from her son's jeans, an act that spoke to denial, panic, or a misguided attempt to protect him. Her actions, though perhaps understandable in a twisted sense of maternal instinct, only compounded the legal and emotional fallout. She now faced her own consequences for tampering with evidence, highlighting how a single crime could fracture multiple families. Throughout the proceedings, Aiden remained largely detached. At times he appeared bored, at others distant, like he was watching the events unfold from somewhere outside himself. His attorneys sought psychological evaluations, desperate to explain a mind capable of such violence, but every report returned with the same chilling conclusion. He understood the gravity of his actions. The community watched, stunned and silent, realizing that some questions would never have a comforting answer. Some darkness, it seemed, cannot be explained, only confronted. As the trial loomed closer, the tension in the courtroom felt almost unbearable. Lawyers prepared their arguments, families held their breath, and the public waited for justice to unfold. But then, in a moment that shocked everyone, Aiden Fucci made a decision no one fully expected. Just before the trial was set to begin, he stood in court and changed his plea to guilty. One word, a single acknowledgement of what had been done. It was abrupt, almost surreal, yet it carried the weight of the unimaginable truth. The courtroom fell silent. Prosecutors paused, reporters stopped typing, and even the judge seemed momentarily stunned by the simplicity and finality of the plea. Aiden's voice was flat, almost rehearsed, devoid of any emotion. He didn't look at Tristyn's family, didn't meet his mother's eyes. For the Bailey family, that one word was both a relief and a fresh wound. The trial, with its painstaking recounting of every horrifying detail, would no longer be necessary, but the confirmation of the truth was an unyielding reminder of what they had lost. When sentencing came weeks later, grief filled the room in a way that words could barely capture. Family members spoke of Tristyn's laughter, her energy, the small moments of everyday joy she had brought to their lives. They spoke of birthdays she would never celebrate, of milestones she would never reach, of a future cruelly stolen. Their voices trembled, each syllable a testament to the hole left in their hearts, a grief shared by everyone who had known or loved her. Aiden's attorneys tried to argue for leniency, emphasizing his age, his potential for rehabilitation, the legal protections afforded to juvenile offenders. They painted a picture of a troubled teen, of a momentary lapse into darkness. But no argument could erase the brutality of the act, the deliberate nature of the violence, or the reality that a young life had been irrevocably taken. Finally, the judge delivered the sentence: life in prison with a mandatory review after 25 years, as required by Florida law for juvenile offenders. The words landed heavily in the room. For Aiden, life as he knew it was over. For Tristyn's family, the verdict was justice, but it was not closure. There would be no returning to normal, no undoing what had happened. The world would continue to turn, but for those left behind, every day would carry the weight of an absence that could never be filled. Even after the sentence was handed down, the story of Tristyn Bailey refused to fade. It lingered in the minds of everyone touched by it, the community, the family, and even the wider public who followed each harrowing detail. Aiden Fucci was transferred multiple times between correctional facilities, each move reflecting ongoing disciplinary issues, conflicts, and struggles to adapt. Inside those prison walls, the chaos he had unleashed outside seemed to follow him, a constant reminder that the violence he had committed would never truly be forgotten. Meanwhile, the appellate process moved forward slowly, but in July 2025, the appellate court upheld his life sentence. The ruling was final, confirming the legal closure of the case, yet it brought little comfort. Justice had been served in a courtroom, but the emotional scars left behind could not be measured or remedied. For the Bailey family, the ruling was a technical acknowledgement of justice, but every day remained a painful confrontation with a loss that no verdict could ever undo. Crystal Smith, Aiden's mother, returned to a life forever altered after serving her sentence for tampering with evidence. Her brief time in jail and years of probation served as a stark reminder of how one desperate act, even in panic or denial, can cascade into consequences that reach far beyond the initial crime. Families on both sides were changed, fractured in ways that would take decades, if not a lifetime, to comprehend. For the Bailey family, the grieving process became a daily ritual. They honored Tristyn through quiet remembrance, community vigils, and small acts that kept her memory alive. Candles flickered in windows, notes were left in the woods where she was found, and photographs captured the girl who had once lit up every room she entered. Her absence became a permanent echo in their lives, a reminder that some losses are too profound to ever heal fully. The neighborhood that had once felt safe carried an unspoken awareness. Even in quiet streets and sunlit yards, there was the knowledge that darkness could arrive unexpectedly, that evil could hide behind familiar faces. Tristyn's story became more than a headline. It became a lasting warning, a narrative of grief, loss, and the fragile boundaries between innocence and horror. In the end, the tragedy of Tristyn Bailey did not conclude with a verdict. It persisted in memory, in vigil, and in the hearts of those left behind. Her light was gone, but the shadow of her story remains, a haunting reminder of a life cut short and a community forever changed.